It was an ordinary morning for millions of people across the country. Some were rushing to work, others were scrolling through their phones with coffee in hand, and many had their television sets tuned to the early news updates. Suddenly, the same headline appeared on every major channel and news website. The breaking news bar flashed in red, the letters bold and dramatic. Bill Cosby back in court over Malcolm murder case evidence. The announcement spread like wildfire. People who had been only half listening to the news suddenly sat up straight. Many could not believe what they were hearing. Bill Cosby, once known as America's dad, had already lived through years of public trials and legal battles. His name had been linked to controversy before, but this time the headline carried a different weight. It was not about entertainment or scandal. It was about a murder case, an old one, tied to the name Malcolm, a name that carried history, tragedy, and mystery. In living rooms across the country, remote controls were dropped, phones were unlocked, and social media timelines exploded. Everyone wanted to know more. What new evidence had appeared? Why now, after so many years, was Cosby's name being linked to the Malcolm murder case? The cameras quickly cut to live footage outside a courthouse. Reporters crowded the entrance, their microphones raised high, each one desperate to get the first comment. Photographers snapped pictures of every lawyer, every officer, and every black car that pulled up near the building. The scene was chaotic, voices overlapping, news tickers rolling, and speculation filling the air. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was even more tense. The hallways buzzed with whispers. Court staff moved briskly, avoiding the press, while security tightened their watch. It was clear that this was no ordinary hearing. Something significant was happening, and everyone wanted answers. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens reacted in different ways. Some shook their heads in disbelief. They remembered Cosby from their childhood television screens, where he had once played the role of a wise and caring father. To them, the idea of him being connected in any way to a murder case was almost impossible to accept. Others, however, were not surprised. They pointed out that the justice system often uncovers truths many years later, and if new evidence had surfaced, then it was only right for the court to reopen the matter. At coffee shops, bus stops, and office lunchrooms, conversations quickly shifted to the breaking news. Some people were glued to their phones, refreshing their feeds for updates. Others debated loudly about whether the case was real or just another attempt to gain headlines. The name Malcolm itself carried enough power to stir emotions because the case had been whispered about for decades. It was one of those unsolved mysteries that seemed frozen in time, waiting for someone to piece together the missing parts. The news channels replayed the same footage over and over. Anchors spoke in serious tones, trying to explain the little that was known. According to early reports, newly discovered documents and evidence had linked Cosby to certain individuals connected with the Malcolm murder case. Exactly how he was connected was still unclear. Was it direct involvement? Was it through association? Was he a witness, a suspect, or simply a name mentioned in the records? None of that was clear yet. All the public had was the headline, and that alone was enough. To cause waves, Cosby's legal team responded quickly. His lawyer appeared briefly before the cameras, sharply dressed, holding a stack of papers. "Mr. Cosby has nothing to do with this case," the lawyer declared firmly. "These accusations are outrageous and without merit. We will fight them, with every legal option available." He refused to answer any further questions and walked away, leaving reporters shouting after him. But if the lawyer's statement was meant to calm the storm, it failed. In fact, it only made people more curious. If Cosby truly had nothing to do with the Malcolm murder case, then why had his name come up again? Why was the court even entertaining such a connection? Journalists dug deeper, searching archives, pulling up old interviews and contacting former investigators. Social media commentators posted theories and speculation by the minute, some believable, others far-fetched. By evening, the news had reached every corner of the nation. In homes, families gathered around their televisions. In universities, professors discussed the legal implications with students. On the internet, hashtags began trending worldwide. Memes, debates, and serious discussions all mixed together, showing just how deeply the story had touched the public. Behind all the noise, however, one fact remained. The court would now have to review the new evidence. Whether weak or strong, it had been enough to reopen a decades-old case, one that had been silent for far too long. The first day of hearings was short but powerful. Reporters described the courtroom as filled with heavy silence when the judge entered. Everyone waited for the official words, something beyond the headlines. The judge confirmed that new material had indeed been presented to the court. While details could not yet be shared with the public, the judge announced that further hearings would be held to determine the significance of the evidence. With that statement, the room buzzed again, and outside, the news spread like a fresh spark. As the sun set that evening, the courthouse stood under the glow of camera lights. News vans lined the street. Protesters and supporters stood with placards in hand, some shouting, others praying. The world had been reminded that even stories believed to be closed could return without warning. For Bill Cosby, the day had ended without a clear answer, but the fight had just begun. For the Malcolm murder case, it was a new chapter, one that promised revelations, arguments, and perhaps, after so many years, some form of closure. And for the public, the headline was more than just news. It was a reminder that truth has a strange way of resurfacing, sometimes when least expected. The story was no longer about the past alone. It was now about what would happen next. The news of Bill Cosby being linked to the Malcolm murder case was still echoing across the country when people began asking the same question. What exactly was the Malcolm case? Many younger people had only heard the name in passing, while older generations remembered the story as a shadow from the past. It was one of those tragedies that had left marks in history but had never been fully solved. The murder of Malcolm had shocked the nation decades earlier. Malcolm was more than just a man. He was a symbol. His name carried weight, his presence demanded attention, and his life had touched thousands. When he was taken away so suddenly, people were left stunned, confused, and angry. Investigators worked day and night. Witnesses came forward and theories swirled. Yet despite all the efforts, the truth never fully came to light. Over time, the case went cold. The files remained in storage, the evidence collected but incomplete, and the story turned into a mystery that lingered in history books and documentaries. Now, suddenly, after all these years, the past had resurfaced. The court's decision to review newly discovered evidence gave fresh life to an old wound. Journalists dug into archives, bringing back black-and-white photographs, grainy news clips, and long-forgotten interviews. The Malcolm case was back in the headlines, and with it came renewed debate, speculation, and strong emotions. People remembered the day Malcolm had been killed. They remembered the crowds that had gathered, the voices that had cried out for justice, and the silence that followed when no clear answers were given. Many who had lived through that era felt the pain reopening as if time had not passed at all. Younger generations, on the other hand, listened with wide eyes as parents and grandparents told them about those difficult years. It was like a history lesson, only this time the story was alive and unfolding in real time. The question on everyone's mind was, how was Cosby's name tied to it? Early reports suggested that his name had appeared in a set of newly uncovered documents. These documents, according to insiders, had been overlooked or hidden in the archives. They mentioned connections between influential figures of the time, including entertainers, activists, and community leaders. Cosby's name was one of those that appeared, but the details were still blurry. Did the documents suggest that he had witnessed something? Did they place him in the same room as Malcolm shortly before his death? Or was his name simply among many others without real meaning? The lack of clarity only made the public more curious. Every news channel tried to explain the possible links, bringing in legal experts, historians, and even retired investigators. One retired detective spoke during a televised interview. His hair was white now, his voice slower, but his memory sharp. He said he had worked briefly on the Malcolm case in its early days. There were always whispers, he said. Names came up, some we could chase, others we couldn't. But I'll say this, the case was bigger than most people realized. There were powerful figures connected to it, directly or indirectly. I'm not saying Cosby was involved, but I'm not surprised his name is being mentioned now. Back then, a lot of people were in the same circles. His words only added fuel to the fire. Social media lit up with arguments. Some users insisted that this was just another attempt to drag a celebrity's name into a historic tragedy. Others argued that no one should be exempt from investigation, no matter how famous they were. The divide grew deeper with every passing hour. Meanwhile, the families of those who had lived through the Malcolm era watched with heavy hearts. For them, this wasn't about fame, headlines, or debate. It was about reopening a wound that had never healed. Some family members of Malcolm's supporters spoke publicly, saying that if the new evidence brought the truth closer, then they welcomed it. Others worried that the case was being turned into a spectacle, where justice might once again be overshadowed by media noise. Inside the court, lawyers and investigators quietly reviewed the documents. Reporters tried to guess what they contained, but nothing had been made public yet. What was known, however, was that these papers had been locked away for years in storage boxes that no one had bothered to review closely. It was only when a young researcher going through archives for an unrelated project stumbled upon them that the discovery was made. The researcher, whose identity remained private for safety, had apparently flagged the documents and shared them with authorities. From there, the chain of events moved quickly, leading to the current hearings. It was a reminder that history has a way of resurfacing when least expected, sometimes through the smallest accidents. As the past re-entered the present, documentaries about Malcolm began re-airing. Old speeches and interviews played on screens, again reminding people of who he was and why his loss had been so devastating. For many viewers, the connection to Cosby seemed strange, almost unbelievable. He had been an entertainer, a figure of comedy and family shows. Malcolm, on the other hand, had been a serious leader, someone who challenged systems and inspired people. Their worlds seemed different, yet the documents suggested a point of overlap. Historians explained that during that era, many influential figures often crossed paths. Events, fundraisers, and community gatherings brought together leaders, activists, artists, and public figures. It was possible, they said, that Cosby's name appeared simply because he had attended such events. But still, the question lingered. Was there more to it? Day by day, the anticipation grew. Newspapers printed long features about the Malcolm case, retelling the story for younger generations. Radio shows invited callers to share their memories and opinions. Families sat together discussing whether the truth would finally come out. Everyone seemed to have a theory, a memory, or a piece of speculation. And yet, through all the noise, the facts remained limited. The evidence existed. The court was reviewing it. Cosby's name was linked in some way, but the details were sealed. For now, all anyone could do was wait for the hearings to reveal more. The resurfacing of the past had created a strange atmosphere in the country. On one hand, people felt hopeful that perhaps justice, even delayed, could finally be served. On the other hand, many feared that the case might once again end in silence, leaving more questions than answers. The uncertainty weighed heavily, especially for those who had carried the memory of Malcolm for decades. By the end of the week, the courthouse had become a symbol. Crowds gathered outside every day, holding signs, chanting, and waiting for updates. Some carried pictures of Malcolm honoring his memory. Others carried signs demanding fairness for Cosby. The clash of voices created a chorus of tension that filled the air. The past had returned, alive in the present. What had once been a closed chapter was now open again, its pages waiting to be read carefully, line by line. The Malcolm case was no longer just history. It was a living story, unfolding once more, with the promise of secrets revealed and truths uncovered. For the world watching, it was a reminder that time does not erase everything. Some truths wait quietly in the shadows until someone shines a light again. And in this moment, that light had turned back to a name, a case, and a question that refused to stay buried. The morning of the next hearing arrived with unusual energy. Reporters, camera crews, and onlookers filled the streets near the courthouse, their presence a clear signal that this was not an ordinary legal proceeding. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the courtroom. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. The tension in the air was almost palpable, like electricity before a storm. Inside, the courthouse hummed with activity. Lawyers and legal staff moved, quickly, organizing papers, reviewing notes, and preparing arguments. Cosby's legal team appeared calm on the surface, but their expressions revealed focus and determination. Every word spoken, every document held, could shape the course of what was fast becoming a national spectacle. When the judge entered the courtroom, a hush fell over everyone. Cameras were raised, microphones aimed, and the press waited for the first official word. The judge was experienced, known for handling high-profile cases with careful precision. Today, every decision, every ruling, would be scrutinized by the public, and the judge was aware of that responsibility. The hearing began with the presentation of the newly discovered evidence. The prosecution explained that these documents, though decades old, contained references that could link Cosby to individuals involved in the Malcolm case. The words were deliberate, cautious, and professional, meant to convey seriousness without overstepping the bounds of speculation. Legal terms were used to describe connections, relationships, and timelines, all aimed at proving that the court should consider this evidence carefully. Cosby's defense team listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. When it was their turn, they rose confidently to speak. The lead attorney emphasized that Cosby's name appearing in the documents did not indicate wrongdoing. They explained that mere association, especially from years ago, was not proof of guilt. Every statement was designed to create doubt in the minds of the judge and observers, highlighting the importance of careful, evidence-based conclusions rather than sensational headlines. Observers in the courtroom could feel the tension building with every word. The air seemed thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Some spectators whispered to one another, trying to interpret the legal jargon, while journalists typed furiously, capturing every detail for immediate reporting. The atmosphere was a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and curiosity. Outside the courtroom, the story continued to dominate public attention. Social media timelines filled with live commentary, with hashtags trending within minutes. People debated not only the content of the evidence, but also the broader implications. Could a celebrity really be connected to a decades-old unsolved murder? Was this a chance for justice to finally emerge, or was it simply another media frenzy? Opinions clashed, fiercely, with no clear answer in sight. Inside the court, attention turned to the witnesses. Lawyers called experts, historians, and former investigators to explain the context of the documents. Each person spoke carefully, aware that their words would be analyzed repeatedly in news articles, television segments, and online forums. Some described the events of the past, detailing meetings, gatherings, and interactions among key figures of the era. Others focused on the legal interpretation, explaining why even minor references could carry significance in a court of law. Cosby's team countered each point with precision. They highlighted inconsistencies in the documents, questioned the credibility of sources, and argued that the evidence was circumstantial at best. Their strategy was clear: create a strong, professional defense that would demonstrate to the judge that the case could not proceed without further scrutiny. The tension reached its peak when a particularly controversial document was introduced. It contained a brief mention of Cosby's name alongside several others in the context of events tied to the Malcolm case. The room seemed to hold its breath as the judge read the passage. Everyone understood the significance. This was the piece of evidence that had rekindled public interest and brought the case back into the spotlight. Yet, in the courtroom, there was no drama beyond the careful reading of words. It was the interpretation outside the walls that created the headlines. Reporters leaned forward, capturing every nuance, while legal analysts whispered into microphones, explaining the potential implications for viewers and listeners. The words were dissected repeatedly. Could this indicate direct involvement? Or is it simply a reference in a historical document? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, fueling speculation and debate. For those present in the courtroom, every movement mattered. A cough, a note passed between lawyers, a gesture from the defense team. It all became part of the narrative that people outside tried to interpret. The tension was not only about what was being said, but also about how it was being said, and the potential impact each expression could have on public perception. Outside, the public's fascination grew stronger. Demonstrators gathered at the courthouse steps, waving signs and chanting slogans, expressing both support and criticism. Some carried banners demanding justice for Malcolm, hoping the new evidence would finally bring closure. Others defended Cosby, insisting that he was being unfairly targeted by the media and public opinion. The clash of voices created a spectacle, echoing in nearby streets and spilling into social media feeds around the world. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings were detailed and meticulous. Lawyers cross-examined witnesses, raised objections, and referenced case law. Each exchange, though professional, carried weight. The judge listened carefully, asking clarifying questions, ensuring that the discussion remained focused on the legal merits of the evidence. Every decision made in those moments could shape the path forward for the case, potentially determining whether it would proceed to trial. Observers could sense the stakes. This was not just a legal matter, it was a story of history, reputation, and public trust. For some, the courtroom felt like a stage where past events and current realities collided. For others, it was a reminder that justice often unfolds slowly, through careful consideration rather than dramatic gestures. As the hearing continued, small details drew attention. Cosby's demeanor, calm yet focused, was analyzed in photographs and video clips. Lawyers' reactions to each new piece of evidence were scrutinized. Witnesses' explanations were repeated on television, with analysts debating every point, sometimes reaching conflicting conclusions. The courtroom, though physically small, became the center of a nationwide conversation. Hours passed, yet the tension remained high. Every question raised, every document examined, reinforced the sense that this was a case with many layers. Some layers were historical, tied to events long forgotten. Others were legal, requiring interpretation, context, and careful judgment. And above all, the human element, the uncertainty, the curiosity, and the emotional weight, kept everyone engaged. Finally, the judge concluded the day's session. No verdict was reached, and no final determination was made about the strength of the evidence. Instead, the judge scheduled additional hearings, emphasizing the need for thorough review and careful consideration. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind a sense of anticipation and unresolved tension. Outside, the crowds reacted immediately. News vans broadcast live reactions, reporters interviewed demonstrators, and social media feeds exploded with commentary. The story was no longer just about Cosby or Malcolm. It had become a reflection of the public's desire to understand the past, confront uncertainty, and see justice take its course. As evening fell, the courthouse stood quiet for a moment, a temporary calm before the next wave of attention. Lawyers returned to their offices preparing for the upcoming sessions. Reporters filed stories for the next day's papers, and the public, from living rooms to coffee shops, awaited the continuation of a story that had captured the imagination and concern of a nation. The courtroom tension had done more than highlight legal arguments. It had reminded everyone watching that history, law, and human curiosity are deeply intertwined. The past had returned, not quietly, but with energy, urgency, and complexity. And as the hearings continued, the story promised to reveal more layers, more questions, and possibly answers that had long been hidden. By the time the courthouse lights dimmed and the city streets emptied, one thing was clear: the tension would not fade quickly. Everyone, from journalists to casual observers, understood that this was a story in progress. The courtroom was not just a place of law, it was a theater of suspense, a stage where history, justice, and public fascination intersected. As news of the courtroom hearings spread across the nation, public interest exploded. People everywhere wanted to know what was happening with Bill Cosby and the Malcolm murder case evidence. Television screens, social media feeds, radio stations, and newspapers all carried the story nonstop. Families discussed it over breakfast, college students debated it between classes, and office workers whispered about it during lunch breaks. The news had captured the attention of millions, and opinions were pouring in from every direction. What stood out most was how divided people had become. For some, Cosby's name being connected to a decades-old murder case was shocking and hard to believe. They remembered him as a television icon, a man whose performances in comedy shows and family programs had brought laughter and lessons into their homes. In their minds, the Cosby they knew from television could never be linked to something so dark. Many of these people felt defensive, insisting that his reputation should not be tarnished without concrete proof. On the other side, many people felt differently. For them, the resurfacing of the Malcolm murder case was a reminder that justice does not have a statute of limitations in matters of morality. They argued that if new evidence had been discovered, it must be taken seriously, no matter who was involved. These individuals believed that fame or celebrity should never provide immunity from scrutiny, and they expressed a desire to see the truth emerge fully, even if it meant shocking revelations. Social media amplified these divisions. Hashtags related to the case began trending within hours. Some users posted supportive messages for Cosby, highlighting his past contributions to entertainment and society. Others demanded accountability and justice for Malcolm, pointing to the significance of the new evidence and the need to investigate it fully. Comments, memes, videos, and live updates flooded platforms, creating a constant stream of opinions, speculations, and sometimes heated arguments. Every new update from the courthouse sparked hundreds of reactions within minutes. Outside the courthouse, the public's reaction was equally vivid. Crowds gathered daily with demonstrators, supporters, and curious onlookers forming a constant presence. People carried signs, chanted slogans, and waved banners, each expressing their stance on the case. Some held messages demanding justice for Malcolm, hoping that the new evidence would finally provide answers to a long, cold mystery. Others held signs supporting Cosby, declaring that he should not be judged based on documents and speculation alone. The mix of voices created an intense atmosphere, full of energy, passion, and tension. Local communities were also affected in unique ways. In some towns, people held informal discussions in community centers or parks, talking about what the new evidence might mean. Elderly residents recalled the original Malcolm case and shared their memories with younger generations, helping them understand the historical context and the emotions that had surrounded it. In schools and universities, professors used the story to teach lessons about history, media influence, law, and ethics. Even people who were far removed from the legal or entertainment worlds found themselves thinking about the case and discussing its implications. Television channels continued to cover the story in depth. Legal analysts, historians, and journalists were interviewed repeatedly, each providing their perspective on the evidence and the courtroom proceedings. Some experts emphasized the importance of due process, explaining that while the evidence might appear significant, only a careful legal review could determine its real value. Others focused on the societal implications, discussing how the case highlighted the intersection of celebrity, history, and justice. Every segment drew large audiences, reflecting the public's fascination and concern. Radio shows and podcasts added another layer to the conversation. Callers shared their opinions, sometimes passionately, sometimes cautiously. Some argued that Cosby's past should not automatically link him to criminal activity, emphasizing the principle of innocent until proven guilty. Others insisted that even suspicion required attention and thorough investigation, especially given the gravity of the Malcolm murder case. These conversations, broadcast to thousands, helped spread awareness and keep the public engaged in real time. In private households, reactions varied widely. Some families held quiet discussions, trying to interpret the news without jumping to conclusions. Parents explained to their children the complexities of legal cases, the importance of evidence, and why it could take years, even decades, for the truth to emerge. Some younger listeners found the story fascinating, not only because of Cosby's fame, but also because of the mysterious nature of the Malcolm case. Questions filled the air. How could evidence surface after so long? Could this change history's understanding of what happened? What did the new documents really reveal? The division of opinion sometimes led to arguments among friends and colleagues. People who had grown up watching Cosby together now found themselves on opposite sides of the debate. Some felt betrayed, unable to reconcile the image of a beloved entertainer with the possibility of involvement in a serious criminal matter. Others felt cautious optimism, believing that the court's careful handling of the evidence could eventually lead to justice, either confirming innocence or uncovering long-hidden truths. At the same time, journalists worked tirelessly to clarify the facts for the public. News outlets published timelines, explained the history of the Malcolm murder case, and provided analysis of the newly discovered evidence. Reporters often visited the archives where the documents were found, seeking context and details to make the story more understandable. Their reporting aimed to balance the tension between speculation and fact, giving readers and viewers a clearer picture of the unfolding events. The emotional impact of the story was also evident. For families connected to Malcolm, the resurfacing of the case brought back old memories and renewed hope for answers. Some felt that finally, after decades, they might learn the truth about what had happened. Others feared disappointment or misrepresentation in the media, worried that the complexity of the situation might be lost amid sensational headlines. The emotions were raw, and they reminded everyone watching that behind every legal document and courtroom proceeding were real human lives affected by history. Meanwhile, public debates expanded beyond social media and local communities. Opinion, columns, talk shows, and televised debates explored broader issues raised by the case. Was it fair to involve a celebrity in such an investigation? How does history influence contemporary legal proceedings? What does it say about society when evidence is discovered decades after an event? These conversations were not just about Cosby or Malcolm. They were about justice, fairness, and the responsibility of both individuals and society to seek the truth. Despite the disagreements, one common feeling united many observers: curiosity. People wanted to know what would happen next. Would the court allow the case to proceed? Would the evidence reveal something substantial, or would it be dismissed as minor? Each day, new updates from the courthouse reignited discussions, keeping the public's attention focused and the atmosphere charged with anticipation. As the days passed, the divide in public opinion remained clear. but so did the determination of those following the story. News channels continued to provide live coverage, social media users updated timelines constantly, and communities across the country held conversations about history, justice, and responsibility. The story had become more than a headline. It was now a nationwide conversation, touching everyone in some way. The public reaction showed how deeply events from the past can resonate in the present. History, memory, and curiosity combined to create a story that was compelling, emotional, and complex. People were not only observing a legal proceeding, they were participating in a collective experience, reflecting on morality, fairness, and the nature of truth. By the end of the week, the courthouse remained the central focus, but the story had expanded far beyond its walls. Citizens debated in cafes, students discussed in classrooms, and families conversed around dinner tables. The new evidence had achieved more than legal review. It had revived dialogue, sparked reflection, and reminded everyone that the past continues to shape the present. In this environment of divided opinions, one thing was certain. People were paying attention, and the story was far from over. Hearing each report and each new revelation promised to add layers to a narrative that had already captured the hearts and minds of millions. The public's engagement had transformed the case into a reflection of society itself, a society grappling with history, justice, and the search for truth. The division was real, the tension was tangible, and the curiosity was relentless. And, in that mix of emotions, debates, and observations, the story of Bill Cosby and the Malcolm murder case evidence continued to unfold, leaving everyone watching aware that the outcome might not only affect those directly involved, but also influence how history remembers both the events of the past and the people at the center of it. The weeks that followed the courtroom hearings were filled with tension, speculation, and anticipation. Across the country, people followed every update, waiting to learn whether the case against Bill Cosby would move forward. News outlets provided continuous coverage. Social media timelines were updated by the minute, and conversations in homes, workplaces, and schools were dominated by discussions about the possible outcome. The nation seemed to be holding its breath, eager for clarity but uncertain what it would reveal. Inside the courthouse, preparations were ongoing. Lawyers for both sides reviewed their notes repeatedly, checked facts, and strategized for every possible scenario. The prosecution examined the newly discovered evidence carefully, seeking ways to demonstrate its relevance and significance. Cosby's defense team scrutinized every detail, looking for inconsistencies or reasons to challenge its validity. And the process was meticulous, methodical, and slow, reflecting the serious nature of the case. Outside, crowds continued to gather daily, though in smaller numbers than during the initial hearings. Supporters and critics still held signs, chanted slogans, and shared their opinions, but there was also a quiet sense of waiting. People no longer expected immediate answers. They understood that the court would take its time, and that the verdict, whatever it might be, would come only after careful consideration. The tension in the air was subtle but constant, like the feeling before an important event that could change everything. Journalists filled their days with updates from the courthouse. Every small movement, every glance, every comment from lawyers or witnesses was analyzed and reported. News stories explored the implications of the case, explaining what it could mean for Cosby, for Malcolm's legacy, and for the broader questions about justice and accountability. Some reports focused on legal details, others on historical context, and some on public reactions. Together, they painted a picture of a nation watching closely as history and the present collided in a single courtroom. For many members of the public, the story was deeply personal. Families who had been affected by Malcolm's death decades ago followed every report with hope, curiosity, and anxiety. They remembered the unanswered questions, the pain of loss, and the frustration of a case that had gone cold. Now, the resurfacing of the evidence and the court proceedings brought a sense of cautious optimism. Perhaps finally they would gain some understanding or closure. At the same time, Cosby's supporters remained vigilant. They believed in his innocence and emphasized the principle of due process. They worried about media sensationalism, public pressure, and the potential for reputations to be damaged before any verdict was reached. Their concern was not only about Cosby himself, but also about the broader question of fairness in a legal system under intense public scrutiny. Meanwhile, analysts and commentators debated endlessly about the possible outcomes. Legal experts explained that the presence of evidence alone did not guarantee a conviction, highlighting the importance of context, interpretation, and the burden of proof. Others focused on the symbolic significance of the case, suggesting that it represented a moment where society confronts difficult questions about history, celebrity, and accountability. Every opinion fueled public discussion, keeping attention fixed on the story day after day. As the court prepared for its decision on whether to allow the case to proceed to trial, every participant understood the stakes. For the prosecution, it was an opportunity to ensure that important evidence was considered and that justice, however delayed, could be pursued. For Cosby and his defense team, it was a chance to protect his reputation and ensure that the law was applied fairly. For the public, it was a moment to witness history unfold and to consider what justice truly meant. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of anticipation grew stronger. News outlets speculated on what the judge might decide, some predicting that the case would move forward, others suggesting it might be dismissed. The uncertainty created an atmosphere of suspense, not unlike the tension experienced during a dramatic story, but with real-world consequences for those involved. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was quiet but intense. Lawyers reviewed their notes, witnesses prepared for possible testimony, and the judge considered the evidence carefully. Every document, statement, and reference was examined with precision. Decisions were not made hastily. The law required careful evaluation. The judge's responsibility was immense, not only in applying the rules fairly, but also in managing the expectations and emotions of the public, who were watching every move closely. Outside, people continued to gather, though with patience now, replacing the initial excitement. Small groups of supporters and critics discussed their perspectives calmly, sometimes exchanging ideas, sometimes reinforcing their own beliefs. Some carried signs honoring Malcolm's memory, while others carried messages defending Cosby's right to due process. The mix of voices reflected the nation's divided opinions, but also its shared investment in the pursuit of truth. Media coverage remained intense. Reporters provided daily summaries of court proceedings, explored historical context, and interviewed legal experts. Social media users debated fiercely, sharing articles, commenting on live updates, and reflecting on what the potential outcomes might mean. In classrooms and community centers, discussions about the case grew more thoughtful, moving beyond speculation to explore broader questions about history, morality, and justice. The emotional weight of the situation was clear. Families affected by Malcolm's death felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Supporters of Cosby experienced concern and anxiety, wanting the legal process to be fair and thorough. And the public at large experienced curiosity, tension, and a deep engagement with the story, following every twist and turn as it unfolded. Finally, the day arrived when the judge would announce whether the case could move forward. Inside the courthouse, the room was filled with quiet anticipation. Lawyers, staff, journalists, and onlookers waited for the official statement. Cameras were set, microphones ready, and the public tuned in through live broadcasts and online streams. The air was thick with expectation, the result of weeks of attention, debate, and reflection. When the judge spoke, the courtroom listened closely. The announcement was careful, deliberate, and formal. The judge explained that the newly discovered evidence would indeed be allowed for review, meaning the case could move forward. However, the judge emphasized that this decision did not imply guilt or innocence. It was simply a procedural determination, allowing the legal process to continue and ensuring that all relevant material could be considered in the interest of justice. The announcement triggered immediate reactions. Supporters of Malcolm and those seeking justice celebrated cautiously, seeing it as a first step toward uncovering truth. Cosby supporters expressed concern, noting that the procedural decision should not be misinterpreted as evidence of wrongdoing. Outside, crowds responded with mixed emotions, chanting, holding signs, and discussing the implications of the judge's ruling. Media outlets provided instant analysis, explaining what the judge's decision meant, what would happen next, and what the potential outcomes could be. Legal experts clarified that the case would now proceed through standard procedures, including further examination of evidence, possible witness testimonies, and additional hearings. Analysts stressed the importance of patience, noting that the legal process could be slow and methodical, but that each step was crucial to ensure fairness and accuracy. In homes across the country, people reacted in their own ways. Some felt relief that the case was moving forward, hoping that truth and justice could finally be served. Others remained skeptical, emphasizing that the court's decision did not establish guilt. Families discussed the situation thoughtfully, reflecting on the historical significance of the case and the complexity of legal processes. Students wrote papers or debated in classrooms, using the case as a real-world example of law, history, and ethics intersecting. The story continued to dominate public attention. Social media, newspapers, television, and radio provided constant updates, ensuring that people remained informed and engaged. Discussions continued to explore not just the immediate legal issues, but also the broader themes. Justice delayed but not denied, the responsibility of public figures, and the importance of examining history carefully. The case had become more than a courtroom proceeding. It had become a lens through which society examined its values and priorities. As days turned into weeks again, the public remained attentive. The case had sparked curiosity, debate, and reflection on a scale few expected. Everyone seemed aware that the ultimate outcome could have far-reaching implications, both for those directly involved and for how society understands history, justice, and accountability. And so, the nation waited. The courthouse remained a focal point, with lawyers, staff, and observers preparing for the next steps in the legal process. Media outlets continued to provide detailed coverage, social media remained alive with discussions, and the public continued to watch, reflect, and speculate. The story of Bill Cosby and the Malcolm murder case evidence had reached a moment of suspense, with history and law intertwined and the truth waiting patiently to emerge. In the end, the situation reminded everyone that justice is